The story of American independence begins long before the Revolutionary War, in the early days of colonial America. It starts with brave settlers crossing a vast ocean, seeking new opportunities and a chance for a better life. These pioneers left behind everything they knew, driven by hope and the promise of a fresh start. They landed on the shores of a wild, untamed land, ready to build a new world. The initial encounters with the indigenous peoples were a mix of cooperation and conflict, shaping the early dynamics of the colonies. These early colonists faced incredible hardships, battling the elements, disease, and unfamiliar dangers. The harsh winters and lack of resources tested their resolve, but their determination to survive and thrive never wavered. Yet, they persevered, establishing settlements that would eventually grow into thriving colonies. These communities became the foundation of what would later become a new nation. As the colonies prospered, their relationship with Great Britain, the mother country, became increasingly complex. The British government saw the colonies as valuable assets, but the colonists began to see themselves as more than just subjects of the crown. The colonists, accustomed to a degree of self-governance, chafed under the increasingly restrictive policies imposed by the British crown. They valued their autonomy and resented the heavy-handed control from across the Atlantic. They resented being treated as a source of revenue, subject to taxes and regulations that they had no say in creating. The infamous Stamp Act and other taxes sparked widespread protests and a growing sense of injustice. The seeds of discontent were sown, and a spirit of independence began to take root. Influential thinkers and revolutionaries started to question the legitimacy of British rule and advocate for self-determination. The vast distance between the colonies and England fostered a sense of self-reliance among the colonists. They developed their own ways of life, increasingly independent from British influence. They learned to govern themselves, forming their own assemblies and making decisions about local matters. This experience in self-governance was crucial in building a political culture that valued democracy and individual rights. This experience of self-government, coupled with the growing economic power of the colonies, further fueled their desire for autonomy. The colonies were becoming economically self-sufficient, managing their own trade and resources. The stage was set for a clash of wills between a mighty empire and its determined colonies. Tensions escalated as both sides prepared for an inevitable confrontation. By the mid-18th century, the colonies had developed a distinct identity, separate from that of their European counterparts. This new American identity was characterized by a unique blend of cultural influences and a spirit of innovation. They had their own customs, traditions, and a growing sense of national pride. Festivals, local governance, and community events fostered a sense of unity and shared purpose. The colonists, while still acknowledging their British heritage, increasingly saw themselves as Americans, bound together by common values and a shared destiny. This emerging sense of unity was crucial in the face of external threats. This growing sense of American identity would prove crucial in the tumultuous years to come. As the colonies moved closer to revolution, their shared identity and collective resolve would be the bedrock of their fight for independence. The year 1763 marked a significant turning point in the relationship between Great Britain and its American colonies. This year would set the stage for a series of events that would eventually lead to the American Revolution. The 7 Years' War, a costly conflict that had raged across the globe, left Britain deeply in debt. The war had drained the British treasury, and the government was desperate to find new sources of revenue to cover the enormous expenses incurred. To replenish its coffers, the British Parliament turned to its colonies, imposing a series of taxes and duties that were met with fierce resistance. The colonists, who had grown accustomed to a degree of autonomy, were outraged by these new financial burdens. The colonists argued that they should not be subjected to taxation without representation in Parliament, a principle that became a rallying cry for the independence movement. They believed that only their own colonial assemblies had the right to tax them. The Stamp Act of 1765, which required colonists to pay a tax on all printed materials, ignited widespread protests. This act affected everyone, from merchants to lawyers to ordinary citizens, and it galvanized the colonies into action. Colonists boycotted British goods, organized demonstrations, and formed groups like the Sons of Liberty to resist British policies. These acts of defiance were not just about taxes. They were about asserting their rights and freedoms. The cry of no taxation without representation echoed throughout the colonies, reflecting the growing belief that the British government was infringing upon their fundamental rights. This slogan became a powerful symbol of their struggle for justice and self-governance. In 1773, the British East India Company, facing financial difficulties, was granted a monopoly on tea sales to the colonies. This decision was seen as another attempt by Britain to control and exploit colonial trade. This act, seen by the colonists as a blatant attempt to control colonial trade, sparked outrage. The colonists viewed it as an infringement on their economic freedom and a direct threat to their livelihoods. In response, a group of colonists disguised as Native Americans boarded British ships docked in Boston Harbor and dumped 342 chests of tea into the water. This bold act of defiance became known as the Boston Tea Party. This act of defiance, known as the Boston Tea Party, sent shockwaves through the colonies and across the Atlantic. It was a clear message to Britain that the colonists would not tolerate oppressive policies. The British government responded to the Boston Tea Party with a series of punitive measures known as the Intolerable Acts. These harsh laws were intended to punish the colonies and reassert British authority. These acts closed Boston Harbor, revoked Massachusetts' charter, and allowed British officials accused of crimes to be tried in England. The colonists saw these measures as a direct attack on their rights and autonomy. These measures, far from quelling the unrest, only served to further inflame tensions and solidify colonial resistance. The colonies began to unite in their opposition, realizing that they needed to stand together against British oppression. The colonies, united in their opposition to British policies, began to prepare for the possibility of war. They formed militias, stockpiled arms, and convened the Continental Congress to coordinate their efforts. The stage was set for a revolutionary struggle that would change the course of history. As tensions with Great Britain escalated, representatives from the 13 colonies convened in Philadelphia in 1774 for the First Continental Congress. This was a pivotal moment in American history as it marked the first unified action by the colonies against British rule. This gathering of colonial leaders aimed to address their grievances with the British Crown and find a peaceful resolution to the growing crisis. They debated intensely, each colony bringing its own unique perspective and concerns to the table. They drafted a petition to King George III, outlining their rights and demanding an end to oppressive policies. This petition was a bold statement, asserting the colony's desire for fair treatment and respect under British law. However, the king, convinced that the colonists were in open rebellion, rejected their pleas. His refusal only served to deepen the resolve of the colonial leaders, who now saw that peaceful negotiation might not be possible. In 1775, the Second Continental Congress assembled in Philadelphia, this time with a greater sense of urgency. The situation had escalated, and the colonies were on the brink of war. The battles of Lexington and Concord, the first armed conflicts of the Revolution, had already taken place, signaling the start of open warfare. These battles were a clear indication that the conflict had moved beyond words and petitions. The Congress, faced with the daunting task of waging war against a powerful empire, formed the Continental Army and appointed George Washington as its commander-in-chief. Washington's leadership would prove crucial in the difficult years ahead. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress, meeting in Philadelphia, took a momentous step that would forever alter the course of history. They decided that the time had come to declare independence from Great Britain. They adopted the Declaration of Independence, a powerful document that proclaimed the colonies' separation from Great Britain and asserted their right to self-government. This declaration was a bold and revolutionary act. Penned by Thomas Jefferson, the Declaration eloquently articulated the principles of liberty, equality, and the pursuit of happiness, ideals that would resonate far beyond the shores of America. Jefferson's words captured the spirit of the Revolution and the hopes of a new nation. The Declaration of Independence stands as a testament to the courage and conviction of the Founding Fathers. Their willingness to stand up against tyranny and fight for their beliefs laid the foundation for the United States. Men like John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson, inspired by Enlightenment ideals, risked their lives and fortunes to create a new nation founded on the principles of liberty and self-determination. Their vision was not just for their own time, but for future generations. Their bold vision, enshrined in the Declaration, would serve as a beacon of hope for generations to come, inspiring people around the world to fight for their own freedom. The impact of their actions and the document they created continues to be felt to this day, as it remains a symbol of the enduring struggle for human rights and democracy.